I'm Andy Levitt. I'm the chancellor here at UW-Oshkosh, and it really is a delight to have everybody here tonight. And of course, our distinguished guests and panelists here to talk about tonight's featured conversation on electric vehicles. First, I want to thank the Whitburn Center for Governance and Policy Research, and Mike Ford. I also always want to say hello to Regent Emeritus Jerry Whitburn, who of course was the chair of my search committee who brought me here. And so I'm always very indebted to him as well. And there was the Tommy G. Thompson Center for Public Leadership. I always like to say hi to Governor Thompson, who I worked for 2 years during COVID when he ran the UW system, and that was a very high honor indeed. And of course, our friends from WisPolitics that are here tonight for sponsoring and leading and sharing tonight's event with the university and the community and the region. Just a couple of really quick comments. Sustainability is a huge feature of what a lot of us, or all of us, are doing these days. Certainly, just university is no different. We have our own carbon neutrality pledge to meet by 2030, and we know that the big rocks, as I call them, that we have to solve. We have to solve how we heat the campus. We have to solve how we purchase electricity. And we have to do something about cars. Those are the 3 biggest contributors to the carbon footprint at the university. And so tonight's topic is very apropos to that subject. The fact we have Ben Richardson here on the panel who runs our parking services is evident that we really want to try to solve this problem through reducing the number of cars and then of course changing the nature of the cars themselves. So with that, I will hand it back, but thank you all so much for being here tonight.
Good evening. So I'm Alex Stock. I'm the director of the Tommy G. Thompson Center on Public Leadership. And the Thompson Center is really delighted to be able to work with UW-Oshkosh and Whitburn Center to bring you today's event and WisPolitics on the future of electric vehicles in Wisconsin. I want to thank Chancellor Levitt, Mike Ford, everyone here at UW-Oshkosh, at WisPolitics, at the Whitburn Center, as well as Ruth and Mary Kate at the Thompson Center for all your work in making this event happen, and to thank all the panelists and moderator here for being here, and especially all of you for being here or watching on the live stream. I just want to give a brief introduction to the Thompson Center for those who might be unfamiliar with it. The Thompson Center was established to follow in the footsteps of Governor Thompson, who proudly worked with colleagues from both sides of the aisle to advance the public good. We at the Thompson Center seek to carry on Governor Thompson's legacy and work to foster effective public leadership by offering events, funding research and scholarships, and conducting other activities all across the UW system. So it's my pleasure now to introduce Jeff Mayers, graduate of George Washington University and UW-Madison, former reporter for the Associated Press and political writer for the Wisconsin State Journal. He's currently the president of WisPolitics, the premier political news service in Wisconsin, something I enjoy reading every morning when I come in. So thank you, Jeff.
I assure you, we will get to the program eventually after all the introductions. Anyway, thanks, Alex. And thanks to the Thompson Center. Thank you, Ruth Brash, for helping to put this together. You know, we work with the Thompson Center on a few things now. And I think we agree that the best way forward is when you have people from all sides in the room having a conversation. So that's what we try to do with our events. And so I think we're very happy to take part in this one. So why EVs, right? Why are we talking about EVs? Well, I think it's the most tangible way for people to understand what's going on, through the Biden administration's push to make this transition and to mitigate climate change and the effects of the carbon economy. So EVs are a good way to enter the conversation about, what's happening and what our future will be like with more EVs. Yes, there are critics out there. Maybe this isn't exactly the way to go, but this is definitely the path that Congress and the president have taken us on. So maybe we can better understand it. So to lead the panel tonight, we have Hayley Tenpas. She's has her own program at WHBY Appleton. I invite you to listen to that. And she's going to lead this great panel in a conversation on EVs. So welcome everybody. We'll have an audience participation later in the program, but Hayley's going to start it off with questions. So welcome, Hayley.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight and being part of today's conversation, which is at the heart what we are hoping to accomplish today, a conversation. Like Jeff said, I'm Hayley Tenpas. I'm the host of Focus Fox Valley on WHBY Radio, also a proud mama of 3, and happy to be here and have an evening out tonight. So thank you for that. I think we all maybe know someone with an electric vehicle, or certainly we've seen the plugging stations at, my local grocery store. And I'm curious to learn more about this topic too. So let's please welcome our guests, and I will introduce them by name, but I'll let them share a bit of who they are and how they are connected to this electric vehicle revolution, as we're going to refer to it tonight. First, joining us, an executive vice president with WEC Energy Group, Dan Krueger. Dan, hello.
Thank you. I'm Dan Krueger. Pleasure to be here. I'll try to work the mic correctly. Proud dad of 6.
Excellent. Thank you for being here, Dan. Also, Mike Moore, Vice President of Engineering with Oshkosh Corp. Hello to you, Mike.
Hi, Mike Moore. Glad to be here tonight. We've Oshkosh Corporation builds medium and heavy duty trucks, and so we've been working on electrification for about 30 years now, for about 3 decades in various forms, and technology has advanced to the point now that we're actually bringing some product to market now. So.
Welcome to you, Mike. Also joining us here today, Joel Nilsestuen, Assistant Deputy Secretary with the Wisconsin Department of Transportation. Welcome, Joel.
Thanks, Hayley. Good evening, everyone. I'm Joel Nilsestuen. I work at the DOT. I deal primarily with external facing public relations, communications, and legal, but I'm also our executive sponsor for the electric vehicle initiatives at the department. So pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you, Joel. And also Benjamin Richardson, Parking and Transportation Director here on the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh campus. Welcome, Ben.
Hey everyone, Ben Richardson. I run parking transportation here. Been doing it since about 2011. We were one of the first to introduce electric vehicle charging stations to UW within the UW system, and I'm happy to be here.
Let's have a hand for our panelists tonight, please. I want to start by asking, is Wisconsin ready for the EV revolution? Our opening question. Who would like to start off? How about, well, Dan, I'll go back to you over there on the end. Would you begin with, is Wisconsin ready for the electric vehicle revolution?
Okay, thank you. Well, EVs need power. So every time we get a request for EV chargers as the utility here, we send a team out to try to look and make sure that the power can be supplied where you want to put them. So if improvements are needed, we rapidly make those improvements with things like transformers. One of the other questions that we often get with EVs is, where's the power come from? Right? Are we charging them with renewables, or is it coal? What is this? We have some of the most aggressive clean energy targets in the country. We are targeting a 60% reduction in our net CO2 by mass from our 2005 levels by 2025, and an 80% reduction by 2030. So if you get the EV chargers and we're ready to put them in for people, you can count on the power getting cleaner and cleaner as time goes on.
Excellent. Joel.
Sure. Thanks, Hayley. I think, if you take a look today, clearly Wisconsin has a way to go to catch up to where it seems that the vehicle market is going. But the thing that's changing is we're making some pretty rapid progress. If you think about this, just a couple of years ago, There was no federal plan. There was no state level plan for how we should prepare for the rise in numbers of electric vehicles. Now we've got both. They're well coordinated at the federal and state level, and they're moving ahead so that electric vehicle, the charging infrastructure is there that will allow people to drive their vehicle freely throughout the state. Maintaining people's mobility is very important to us. And we want people to, if they're driving EV, to feel confident that they can get to where they need to go. Also, a recent development that's helping us prepare is the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. That Wisconsin is slated to receive $78.65 million over the next 5 years to deploy electric vehicle charging infrastructure throughout the state. These chargers need to be located every 50 miles along what we've determined as alternative fuel corridors. So when the bipartisan infrastructure law passed that contained this funding, Wisconsin had a number of designated alternative fuel corridors. Given the nature of Wisconsin's economy, being a heavy tourism component to it, as well as kind of how our population is distributed throughout the state, we felt we needed to add more alternative fuel corridors, and so we added the entire interstate system, allowed the major north-south highways, and so we really the disbursement throughout the entire state we felt was important to have coverage throughout the state. So when if all goes according to plan and we have the 60 or 62 chargers that would be needed, we believe 85% of people will be within 25 miles of one of those chargers, and you'll be able to freely move throughout the state. We've been doing a lot of outreach to private industry, to academia, to the public, to help us develop this plan. And even all of that said, we're probably still not at the point where if your level of knowledge is watching TV commercials and watching electric vehicles and Ford Lightning power a house, we're probably not quite there yet. We have just under 14,000 registered electric vehicles in the state. That may sound like a big number, but it really is about 2% of the state's fleet at this point. The thing is that's growing very rapidly. The number has grown about 9% each year from 2016 to 2020, and that jumped in just the first 6 months of 2021. It grew by 21%. So this is something that consumers are responding to. They're making their decision if they want an internal combustion engine or an electric vehicle, and we're seeing more of them adopt electric vehicles for various reasons. So right now we've got limited numbers of chargers, of publicly available chargers, and that's something that we feel that we can effectively use this funding to really build that out so that there is a reliable charging network to help the further deployment and adoption of electric vehicles.
Thank you, Joel. I want to turn to you, Michael, as Oshkosh Corporation has a whole brand dedicated to electric vehicles. I'm wondering if you can speak to Wisconsin's readiness for the EV revolution.
Sure. So my comments would be more around medium and heavy truck, and that's a little different. The technology is different. Those are fleet owners. Those can be small businesses, could be large businesses, large fleets. It's municipalities, and so it's a little different. It's different technology. The battery technology is different. The use profiles are different on that, and so and as I mentioned earlier, the technology, we're still early into this travel in the revolution, and so. The technology, the battery technology has just gotten to the point where in certain vocation, electrification starts to make sense. It starts to make sense for the business owners and returning on a total cost of ownership and the investment in those vehicles that they use to make money. So we're early in this. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. I think needs to be done by the manufacturers, needs to be done by the state, the utility companies. It's new, and the owners, the fleet owners are struggling with it. They don't understand the infrastructure. It's new technology. How does this impact my business? So there's a lot of education that we need to do early in the revolution, and so we all have to work towards that.
Thank you, Mike. Ben, I'll turn to you as well. As UW-Oshkosh, one of the first to have things like charging stations on a university campus. How do you see the EV revolution?
I mean, I guess I see it from a little bit more of the customer base that we have. We've found that throughout the years as we've grown, we've had more and more people asking about electric vehicle charging stations. Back when we started implementing our first few chargers in 2012, they weren't really utilized. There's a few people, myself included, who had an electric vehicle. I purchased mine in 2013. Who began to use those, and then they would get a lot of questions. So I think education is a big part of how we move forward with the revolution here to help people understand how these vehicles work. I mean, we still get questions as to in the realm of range anxiety, where people are wondering, how am I going to get from point A to point B if I can't charge, between this point and that point, which I believe Joel had kind of alluded to earlier, trying to make it so that we have a more dynamic plan where people aren't facing that type of anxiety. So, from our standpoint, we kind of see people increasingly asking about it and looking to purchase an electric vehicle. But it is certainly a growing thing here at UWO.
I want to ask now about some of those federal incentives that are out there. The Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act in 2021, the Inflation Reduction Act, IRA, in 2022. We know that Wisconsin policymakers have been working to capitalize on this level of funding and new incentives as well that support economic growth. We know that there are funding caps or phase out dates. So I'm curious, are the federal incentives big enough to meet the goals of electric vehicle use? Joel?
Sure. The one we're currently working on deploying the Wisconsin Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, which is that 78.6 million that we'll be receiving over 5 years. We believe that is adequate to meet the requirements under the bipartisan infrastructure law of having those, charger every 50 miles, not more than 1 mile off the interstate or the exit. That our napkin math says that each one of these level 3 chargers for a turnkey comes in at right around $1 million. So we believe that we have enough to deploy the plan so that our alternative fuel corridors are covered. That the goal of this is really to address that range anxiety. And so that if you're traveling interstate or across the state, you'll be able to get to where you need to go if you run, if your battery's getting low. The studies that I've seen have shown that approximately 80% of the charging will happen by electric vehicle owners at home. And so we're really the first kind of question or need that we need to address is really that longer range type of travel. And I think that this is a good first step, but as we see the market continue to transition to electric vehicles, obviously there's going to need to be more charging capacity, more chargers made available to the public. But this is really where, as others have alluded to before, this is a relatively new technology. Charging infrastructure, charging stations are a new technology being put out. So what we're trying to do is make this funding available to the private sector so that it's very capital intensive. We can help offset some of that early kind of leading edge type of investment and show that these are viable and operate well, service the needs of the public. And so that it's kind of a proof of concept that it's envisioned that the private sector will continue to make the investments to meet that market demand.
Dan, go ahead.
So from the utility perspective, customers approach us and ask about chargers at their business, at hotels, sporting arenas, right? And we have a pilot program. It's a 5-year, $50 million program that's been approved by the Public Service Commission of Wisconsin. So we're filling in those gaps, in smaller than the interstate, so you can drive safely to work or go to the hotel. And the program it's very interesting. So you can buy your own charger, or you can get one from us if you need to. And we have allowances for customers. So it could be, UW wants more, right? And we calculate out what's the customer allowance, and that allowance goes first towards what does it cost us to improve the infrastructure to get to your meter? And if it's already strong enough, well, that whole allowance can be used to offset your costs up to where the charger goes. So we're seeing a lot of success with customers doing that. We have hundreds of chargers that have been installed. So success is there. And then there's also things like the delivery fleets, which are installing hundreds of chargers for overnight charging and bus systems, et cetera. So I think there's a mix. You buy it at home, you get your charger, you work with the utility, you get it at work or the hotel or wherever. And then you go to the interstates and you got the NEVI-WEVI program, as we call it.
Dan, just a follow on that, the average single family home, is it set up to be able to charge an electric vehicle? Can you maybe expand on that a bit for us?
It is. I mean, electric charging is kind of like politics. It's all local. Okay. So it depends on the transformer on your street. If you and all your neighbors want to put in the electric chargers, then we have to upgrade the transformer for your street. If you're one of the first or two, you probably have got it, right? So that's why it's always call your utility before you dig and before you put in your electric vehicle charger, please. And but we'll make sure that you can charge your car.
Any follow-up for you gentlemen on federal incentives being big enough to meet the goals? Mike?
I would say from a manufacturer's perspective, there's in the Inflation Reduction Act, there's a lot of money in there, billions of dollars set aside in there for the transition to electric vehicles. And we're seeing grants and money being given to companies to build battery factories, to transition current factories over to building electric vehicles. So from that perspective, there's a lot of money there to facilitate that. From an acquisition or purchase standpoint, there's a few states in the country that are doing an okay job. They kind of take a carrot and stick approach where they're introducing regulation requiring this transition over for the truck fleets, but they also accompany that with some money to help the fleets and in that transition. If you look at an acquisition of a heavy truck, we're talking in the neighborhood of the truck costing twice of what it would normally do for a nice engine. So if you're to spend $350,000 for a refuse truck, a battery electric refuse truck is going to cost $700,000 to $800,000, and that's a pretty big investment. And so there needs to be some of that carrot and stick approach, but there also needs to be from the manufacturers. We have to be aware of that, and over the life of that truck, we have to reduce costs in other areas, like not having to do brake changes or fewer brake changes, and not doing oil and filter changes and those type of things over the life of that to offset some of that cost too. But I think so this will transition over slowly, and depending on where the money's at for those acquisition and where the regulation sits is where we see the truck portion starting to migrate over and the interest across the U.S.
Yeah, a great reminder that the EV revolution is not going to happen today,
No.
by the way. I'm curious, though, to how Wisconsin sits in comparison to other states when it comes to taking advantage of federal incentives.
I'd say for Wisconsin, the biggest barrier that is the biggest hurdle that we have to overcome is within some of the federal requirements require that when electricity is sold to the consumer, that the EV driver that is sold by the kilowatt hour. that's important for both consumers and for businesses. You need to be able to really determine what is the electron, the number of electrons, the number of juice that's equivalent to a gallon of gas, or to be able to measure it out. The consumer needs to know what price they're paying for how much electricity they're going to get. And especially with fast charging, that's especially important. It's important for businesses to be able to do that computation, so that right now if you're not a utility, you can only charge by time, and with the varying rates that the cars accept electricity from the charger, that's a degree of uncertainty, and so businesses need to be able to measure what they're selling so they can make their business decisions accordingly. In Wisconsin, our statutes currently don't allow that. If you're selling electricity, you are considered a utility, and you are regulated as such. And sure, not every gas station owner wants to be regulated to the WEC or any of the other utilities. So that change to Wisconsin state statute. Wisconsin's an outlier right now, and we're one of just a handful of states that has not been able to get into compliance with this requirement. I'm optimistic that in the near term, that there'll be a viable policy solution moving through the legislature. I think all parties realize, regardless of what side of the aisle that you're on, or your position on electric vehicles versus internal combustion engines, you can't ignore the fact that the market is transitioning here. Consumer preference is moving in this direction, and that Wisconsin, if we don't do something to address this, Wisconsin will continue to be a darker and darker spot on the electrification map across the nation. So I think that we'll be able to address that, and that's really the biggest hurdle that I think is preventing us from being able to get these monies up to the private sector to start setting up charging stations.
Mike, from the manufacturing perspective, where does Wisconsin sit?
Well, so I normally don't lift California up to be the role model necessarily, but I think from the incentives and what they're really aggressive. Let's face it, they're really aggressive. They have goals out there. They've passed regulation. They also have money. They have so for heavy truck, I know one program has 350 million. They'll issue vouchers between $120,000 to $150,000 per voucher for a heavy truck that's bought and placed into California. And so, that's pretty aggressive in our view. I would say, and I think, but not every state's like that. In fact, most states aren't like that. And so from our standpoint, Wisconsin's no better, no worse than I think probably 40 other states in the country, as far as how they're promoting and readiness here. So like I said, it's early, and this will all evolve over time here, as technology evolves, and as Joel said, there's certainly a consumer demand around electric vehicles. And so the manufacturers, the utilities, the states will all support that and continue to advance that forward.
All right. Anything to add to that topic of Wisconsin's place? All right, we'll move on. There are, of course, some who are critical, and they say there are negatives associated with greater electric vehicle use. I've learned a new term today, by the way, in range anxiety. So what about bigger and heavier batteries, lack of charging stations, limited range, that range anxiety for current electric vehicles? I'll start with you, Ben, seeing as you have a lot of students perhaps, or people on campus who use every day an electric vehicle. What do you see from your perspective? Is the supply greater than the demand, or what do you see?
So one of the interesting things that I would say is the old adage, if you build it, they will come. When we first installed our electric vehicle charging stations, it did take some time, but eventually we were over capacity. as far as, what we were designed or trying to do. Some of my other colleagues had approached me within UW system, Point most recently, who installed some electric vehicle charging stations, who kind of had a similar question. What's the point? I don't see very many electric vehicles on campus, and I think it goes back to a number of years ago. You might have been driving on the highway and said, "Oh, look, there's a Tesla! Wow!" Now, as you're driving on the highway, you're like, another Tesla, right? Because it just, they're here. You just more and more of them are being distributed. It seems like every day, right? So what I told them was, if you build it, they'll come. So I think it's a thing where because the infrastructure maybe isn't there, you may not notice it, but they are around. They don't have a place to go necessarily where you are at.
Thank you, Ben. To you, Dan, I'm curious about charging stations and that negative association, again, with that range anxiety, as we heard earlier. Can you speak to that and how you are looking to address those and provide more?
Well, again, we have a pilot that's been approved by the Public Service Commission, and we're responsive to businesses or residences or fleets that ask for chargers. We as the utility, we are not in the business of charging, right? So that's up to others. That's, Quick Trip's my favorite example, right? They do that. We just provide the power. So I guess my only answer to that is, if you let us know where you want the chargers, right? We will do our best to make sure that the distribution system is ready for it. And we're constantly working to make sure that our fleet transition, the generating fleet transition, meets the goals we've set out, and that you're charging your cars with the kind of power that you're kind of expecting to be charging with, right? It's going to take us some time, but we'll get there. So our role is to provide the power.
Let's talk battery size. Mike, I would imagine with the utility vehicles you're creating, they could get rather large. Can you share a bit?
Yeah, so extremely large. So if you look at a battery I'll talk about refuse, the refuse market, our batteries are generally 5 to 6 times larger than what you'd find on a passenger car to do the work. The refuse truck will run 10 and a half hours a day, 6 days a week. It'll service 1,200 homes. An automatic side loader will service 1,200 homes in a day. So there's just a lot of work being done. They'll run to the landfill at least once a day, sometimes twice a day. And so anytime you change that model, it impacts the business. If you don't have enough energy or range to do that work, you're either stopping midday, which you aren't servicing as many homes, or if the payload isn't there, you're having to run to the landfill more often, and then you're servicing fewer homes, and so that's just not a good model here. So we've spent a lot of time, and that was one of the challenges, whether it's range, our battery sizes are large, that normally would take away from payload. So we have to offset that weight someplace else on the vehicle to make up for that and make sure the weight distribution is correct. So we can still carry 10 tons of payload. So that's, so that the payload's a big deal. Range is a big deal. You need to work all day long. Trucks aren't working all day long. We don't get our trash picked up. That's a problem for me anyway. So so they have to do the job, and so that's real. That's real. And the technology has to catch up with that and be able to provide that to make those products viable in those situations. And fire trucks, quite a bit different profile than what a garbage truck is, and certainly. When you look at a fire truck, maybe the range is 14-mile range or radius around the fire station is where it operates all of its life. So it doesn't need to run like a refuse truck 120 miles. It's running 14 miles. But you don't run, that everyone depends on that fire apparatus and rescue. So in those hybrid application, it works well where 95% of the time, a fire truck can run on batteries. Battery sizes are large enough in that 14-mile radius. But if they're on site for an extended period of time, pumping a lot of water and a large fire, you need the diesel engines to be able to accommodate that and fight those fires. So every vocation's different, but those things are real, and to make product viable, we have to find solutions there to overcome those.
All right, Joel?
Sure. I think that range and range anxiety is the biggest feedback that we get. We've done dozens and dozens of outreach from anywhere from interested members of the public to utilities to Quick Trip, trying to solicit feedback. And the number one comment that we get from EV owners or potential EV owners, people interested in charging, is, where are the charging stations, and are there an adequate number? But there are also, some other concerns that we look at, from kind of a transportation perspective, and something that Mike said kind of jogged my memory, is that, the present battery technology that we use with lithium ion batteries, they do present, if you're in a crash scenario, they do present, chemical and fire hazards. And so, training standards, awareness, for first responders, for law enforcement is important. And so we've been working on, doing outreach to first responders to teach, the best practices for when you're dealing with a vehicle fire for an electric vehicle. We're rolling out a new electric vehicle plate, license plate, so that, first responders will be able to quickly and easily identify, is this an electric vehicle? Do I have to pay attention to the fire and chemical component of this, where those concerns would be different with an ICE engine. Another one is that, and this is a big one for us, we pay for a lot of those roads out there are paid through motor fuel tax. And motor fuel tax has really been, for a long time, has been the biggest contributor to the transportation fund. It's really a kind of a proxy for a user fee. The more you drive, the more gas you burn, the more tax you pay. Obviously, EVs aren't paying a motor fuel tax when they're charging. And so we've had a couple of, but they're still driving on roads, and everybody who uses the roadways, I think it's pretty accepted that you should pay your fair share to use those roadways. We've had a number of this isn't a new problem. For a long time, we've seen, as vehicles have become more fuel efficient, we've seen a gradual erosion of motor fuel tax. And, that is only accelerating as the public increasingly adopts electric vehicles, and the rate of erosion accelerates. There have been a couple of kind of temporary type stopgap type solutions. EV owners now pay an additional registration fee on their electric vehicles. And beginning next year, under the latest state budget, the state will transfer general purpose revenue, or general type tax dollars, from the general fund to the transportation fund over the next 2 years, of the amount that's estimated to be what would be the sales tax on electric vehicles. These are temporary type solutions. And this is a nationwide debate about how do we adequately fund transportation so that it's safe, so that it's efficient, that it is the type of system that a 21st century system that people expect to have. And so we're looking at there are a number of different models that people are looking at, where there's a road user charge, or tolling, vehicle miles traveled charge. All have positives, all have negatives to them. It's really, I think, the next piece that a big nationwide solution is going to be needed to address just how we fund paying for roads and bridges.
I'd love to ask about Wisconsin's infrastructure currently, and I feel like, Joel, this might be coming right back to you, so forgive me for that. But does Wisconsin have the infrastructure to handle an EV revolution?
I think, like I stated earlier, from a charging facilities standpoint, no, it's not there yet, but there is the blueprint to get there. and there's the funding to get there. When we were studying, where do you need to deploy these chargers to be able to get the most bang for the buck and to make them, to make them user friendly for people. I know charge times are coming down as, as battery technology advances and as you get higher amounts of power flowing through, look from level 1 chargers to 2 to 3, that charge time gets shorter. But it's not yet at a point where, it's just like pumping filling up your tank at Quick Trip and heading off. So we want to make sure that we, deployed these, at sites where there would be other amenities, other things that people could do to, go shopping or, get a cup of coffee or whatever, some type of amenity. Obviously, we don't want to stick these in the, middle of a cornfield and expect people to, stand out there and charge their cars. But so I think we've mapped these out and we have a good plan to get there. We've got the funding to get there. One of the other crucial components is as we're mapping out where these chargers would go, where does it fit from the federal requirements, where does it fit, for a lot of, traffic volume so that they could be utilized. We also had to take a look and see what is how does the power grid look? Is there the transmission capacity to be able to handle this amount of use? And in talking with our friends in the utility sector and talking with the Public Service Commission, we believe that there is the infrastructure in place, and that it does have the capacity to continue to grow to meet that emerging and growing demand. So from that perspective, I feel like we've got the ingredients that are necessary to get there. It's just being able to, overcome some of the obstacles so that they get deployed and are made available to the public.
Yes, that power grid, Dan, how is it looking?
The power grid looks good. So it's all just a matter of coordination and planning, right? So as Joel said, we're coordinated with the state on the corridor. All those stations, we have them mapped against our distribution system. It is interesting when you think about, go to a crowded corner of an intersection, there's 3 gas stations, right? Or 2 gas stations and a Walgreens. And if you look 10 years down the road and both those gas stations want a dozen fast chargers, right? Fast chargers use a lot of power and the Walgreens wants chargers. It is possible that we may have to be building a new substation somewhere nearby, right? Or expanding the substation. So it's a function for us of how many chargers, what kind of chargers. So our load in We Energy's territory the peak is 5,000 megawatts. Okay, so for comparison, the average home in Wisconsin uses 8 megawatts a year. So our peak load instantaneous is 5,000 just at any moment in time. Our pilot is adding maybe 100 megawatts to that. So right now, for the foreseeable future, the impact of EVs is de minimis to our system. The only thing that could really cause a little bit of a blip there is if there's a concentrated need for fast chargers in a certain area against one substation.
Mike, I see you ready to roll. Go for it.
Yeah, so as we look out on our customer base, charging infrastructure is their top concern for to move to EV adoption, and so kind of put that in perspective. You're kind of hearing this, it's kind of complicated. So when we talk about fast charging, it's 4 hours to fast charge 500 kilowatts of batteries to full charge, and for the business owners, it's important when we're charging. Most of the refuse trucks, for example, come back. A fire truck can be charging all day. That's peak hours. A refuse truck comes back into the yard about 5 o'clock. That is the peak. Everyone's coming home. Everyone's turning on their lights, the air conditioning, the heat in the winter. and the demand on the electrical grid is high during that time. You don't want to be charging the truck in. So you want to charge the truck in and peak it and charge it off hours, probably between 9 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the morning. That shortens that charge time down. Now you've got now if we're deploying 5 or 6 trucks into a yard at a time, do you have enough power coming into that site to hook all those trucks up and charge within 4 to 6 hours? That's a challenge, and it becomes complicated. How big of a charger? How many trucks per charger do I use? How does that impact my operational expense? What's it look like for a capital expense? All those things have to be sorted out and figured out. And so, yeah, they know where to go buy the trucks. They just, the customers are struggling with what do we do with the infrastructure. And I think that's where we can come together and help them and educate and provide them with what do the trucks need, what kind of power coming in there. A charger that we use is 483 phase. That's the power it takes to charge 180 to run 180 kilowatt hour charger, to charge the big trucks in there. So it becomes very complicated, and it becomes a site by site, customer by customer, or municipality solution that has to be figured out and then executed upon.
Joel, I'm curious how those federal incentives might relate specifically to Wisconsin's infrastructure, and if we're taking advantage of anything today when it comes to that.
I'm most familiar with the NEVI program. There's an additional entitlement under the BIL for community-based charging, which is the guidance is yet to come out on that. But I'm not as familiar with the incentives to companies or to customers. I know I've been looking for a new car recently, and I've been trying to weigh out as I use a vehicle primarily for commuting back and forth from work, but also on a trip up from Madison to an event like tonight. Would that meet my needs? So I'm see the tax credits that are available, and that becomes attractive. But in terms of NEVI itself, it's a good first step in getting that first network of charging out, so that you can address range anxiety. And it's really that offsetting the costs, the initial capital intensive cost for the private sector to incentivize them to invest in it while this technology matures.
All right. We talked a little bit about the negatives. Let's lighten it up a bit. I'd love to hear more on what you believe to be some of the positives. What excites you about electric vehicles and this revolution we've been referring to tonight? Mike?
Okay. Okay. So it's what excites me about it is to me, it's less of a revolution and more of an evolution. And we've seen this. I think we've seen this in the car sector where initially a lot of the work, a lot of the engineering design work was around how do we take this car that exists, this ICE engine, how we get batteries on it, and then how do we get more batteries on it in a hybrid application. And I think that's kind of, and Tesla, I think, is one that maybe pushed this the furthest is when they brought out a car, it wasn't just how do I get batteries on an existing car? It was what can I do with now an electric car? And we saw it was trunk up front, but it's a different driving experience. It's the screen. It's a platform for autonomy, and I think that's where the manufacturers are going to go. And migrate towards and so for vocations is how do we take that platform, that electric platform, and use it as a catalyst to improve the driver experience so they're not so wore out and beat up all day long in a 10-hour shift. How do we make it safer for the driver and put them in a position where they're not backing into stuff all the time? We can get a more maneuverable vehicle. We can get a more comfortable vehicle for them. We can design a vehicle that accommodates a broader, more diversity from a 5 percentile female to a 95 percentile male, so that now more diverse workforce can work and operate in a truck and it's safer. And so, and safer for the community to work around when you don't have to build a truck. So I always just talk about, when you design around an ICE vehicle, we literally start by positioning the engine in the truck and we build everything out around it, the engine tunnel, and then we're limited on how wide we can go by FMVSS laws. So literally what's left in that vehicle is where we stuff the driver into the operator into that vehicle. And it's been that way for years. Well, now we don't have a nice engine. So what can we do to create a better vehicle and a better environment, and a safer environment? So we can do things like increase the amount of glass in the windshield in the truck, just so we can see the community and make it safer while it's operating in the community. So that's what gets me excited, is about how electric vehicles can be a catalyst to bring a lot more things and features and benefits into to the operators and to the communities too.
We'll go down the row on this one, Joel.
Sure. From a state government perspective, I think the thing that is the greatest promise of EVs is in, dramatically lowering our carbon footprint. If you compare economy-wide energy use by sector, transportation is the second largest energy user. And so in one sense, it's low-hanging fruit, or one of those areas, not necessarily low-hanging fruit, but one of those must-address type. If we're going to be looking at climate change and looking at decarbonization, it is something that we really need to take a look at. And what gets me excited about that is, oftentimes when you're participating in a panel or having, an academic debate and we're talking about decarbonization, part of that conversation gets to be, limiting vehicle miles traveled, and that, limiting people's mobility. From a transportation perspective, I'm not excited about, limiting people's mobility. I want people to be able to get where they need to go when they need to go. I want them to get there efficiently. I want them to get there safely. And so I think looking at electric vehicles really has a lot of promise, despite some of the challenges and growing pains. I think it holds a lot of promise. And you look, as Dan was saying, about the kind of the redesign, the reimagining of these vehicles. We're also, another emerging technology are, connected and automated vehicles. So vehicles that can talk to one another. So the car in front of you slowing down very dramatically. And, is there built-in safety technology to auto brake so that you don't have as severe, hopefully you don't have a crash, or it's a less severe crash. When I got my current car, it had a backup camera and blind spot monitoring. And at first I thought, I don't want to pay for those. I use my rear view mirror and I turn my head and I look, and that's how I learned how to do it. With having kids and going through that daycare parking lot twice a day, I can tell you that is a really useful technology, and one that I'm glad is there. And so, this is another technology that will continue to see mature and evolve and be integrated into new vehicles in ways that yield much better safety outcomes for people. On a personal level, I like the performance of these things. I mean, you test drive one of them and it is fun. They go, they really go. So.
Thank you, Joel. Ben, your thoughts on what you believe excites you about this industry?
Sure. I think Mike and Joel, they covered a lot of ground there. But one of the things that I guess I would add would be the way that electric vehicles interact with other things around us, kind of the greenscape of things, I guess, for lack of a better word. It's a great gateway into things like carports, where you're collecting solar to kind of create or generate the power for these electric vehicles, and kind of creating that more green energy solution. So I think it kind of helps us to learn and build in better, more productive ways, and to improve that greenscape as well.
Boy, I think you guys took all my points. But I like people having choices. I think if people want electric cars, they should be able to have them, right? And And the more we produce of them, the more the price point comes down, the more chargers there are. Give people the freedom to choose and that's only a positive.
All right, gentlemen, thank you. Something for us all to think about on our drives home tonight. Thank you, gentlemen. We will now open up a question and answer session from all of you in the audience. Jeff has the microphone, and if you raise your hand, he would love to come to you. Please state your name and state your question.
We're gonna go to the chancellor first, okay? It's your house, so you get to ask the question.
This is a question about human nature. I have a lot of anxieties. I would have range anxiety. I'm the guy who gets to the airport 2 hours early in case the plane leaves early. You know, that's the kind of guy I am. That's right. It's never happened, but I'm there. I'm ready for it. I remember in college, when you lived in a house that didn't have a washing machine, you go to the laundromat. And you'd stand there in the laundromat and all the washers and dryers were filled with clothes that aren't turning because they're just sitting there because the owners of those clothes are nowhere to be found. And so you end up digging them out and putting them in a cart someplace. How is that not happening, or is it happening with these charging stations? I can only imagine that the demand for them as they go up, and it takes a while to charge a car, right? I don't know. I have no idea how long it takes to charge. Apparently 4 hours for a truck, but probably shorter amount of time on a fast charger for a car. But that really is going to could be disruptive in terms of your planning of a trip because you have to wait. You may have to wait in line to get a charger. And so I'm curious as culturally, how's that been working?
We're gonna have fights at the charging station.
I was gonna say, so one of the interesting things about the electric vehicle revolution here is the ability for something to fast charge. Well, it used to take a very long time, you know, to charge a car. That does get shorter and shorter. But much like your cell phone, if you need to charge your phone and you're at 20%, you're going to notice that, you know, you're at 50% and then you're suddenly at 80%, right? Once you get to that 80%, there's a lot less cells that are easily accessible for that electric current to reach, right? So it takes a long time to, just like your phone, to get that 80% to 100%, but to kind of get that shorter burst, which is the majority of your range, that time can be quite short, especially with some of those larger, you know, charging stations.
You don't necessarily top it off, you just get it charged. And then move on.
Yes, the idea would be that you would get it charged and then you would move on. Now, I don't know that everybody's going to necessarily do that, you know, but that's the idea behind it. You know, you got that 20 to 80% and then you're good.
But by the time a lot of people have EVs, there will be more charging stations, so therefore there shouldn't be long lines, or could there be long lines?
I think Ben's points about, you know, the type of charging and the speed of charging is, you know, this technology is growing and there's been just so much private investment in battery technology that, you know, when we're talking about the legislative change that we're looking to advance, that it's like, how do you define terms so that, you know, how do you attempt to future proof it so that in, you know, 4 years it's not, you know, outdated by specifying, you know, certain standards. Yeah, Jeff, Chancellor, to your question on, are there going to be, you know, lines for the charger? I'd say, you know, one, I think there are two types of people in the world, and you know, we all like Quick Trip and go to Quick Trip, and there are some people that fill up their tank and then go park the car in a parking stall, and there are some people that leave their car at the pump. The beauty of this program is we are offsetting the costs for the private sector, and so that is, you know, a solution that I think, you know, convenience store operators have worked out. Clearly, 62, you know, NEVI sponsored fast chargers aren't going to solve our you know, charging needs, but as if to say that the numbers will continue to, you know, be available to grow and leave it to the private, you know, a lot of that to the private sector. But you know, these are things that we're thinking about as we've, you know, looked at where do these chargers go? Where do you place them? When we've done outreach with groups, we've talked with groups that advocate for the disabled community, and they're saying, hey, those, types of Tesla chargers that where you back into it, that can really make it difficult for somebody who utilizes a wheelchair, and that configuration doesn't work. What if you're towing a trailer? That configuration doesn't work. So I think, people are thinking about how does the layout of the gas station, the electric charging station, how does that work with this new technology so that things flow and you're not sitting there waiting to get plugged in.
A related audience question came to me via text, and the question was, what about the dream of everybody having a solar panel in their backyard, and then they're going to be using that to charge their vehicle? I'm sorry, Dan, that might would that bypass you guys, or I don't know, how would that work? Is that a real vision to have the solar panel in your yard that was going to be used to charge your vehicle?
I mean, I think people are thinking about that already. I know service stations are talking about it. The average panel is 300 watts. So if you put 10 of them on your house, that's 3,000 watts. To charge your car with 3,000 watts, I mean, that's 2 days, I don't know. But so you can there's probably something to it where, if you have that arrangement on your home, you can get some partial charges, right? And top off your tank and things like that. But it's a long ways down the road, I think.
Okay, here's a question.
First thing I saw at a Quick Trip, a Tesla in the gas pumps because all the parking spaces were full at the convenience market. So there's the opposite. But my question is, why would the utility companies get into this? I mean, it would seem to me that could be the most efficient way to get, I mean, a charging station is basically, power coming in, you've got metering and delivery, but why wouldn't that be a business that the utility companies would embrace? I realize you'd have to get regulatory permission, but as you talked about consumer protection, that's already sort of built into the utility company model. So is that even on the table? Don't tell me anything, you'd have to kill me if you told me, but is that something utilities are considering as a way of getting power to the future?
Not this utility. So there are some utilities that have indicated a desire to get into the EV charging networks and to build them. We think that's the business of our customers, right? So we don't view that as core to us. We think it's fair to provide the power, make sure that it's enabled and it happens, and we let the private sector and the government sector decide, the rest of it. So we're not getting in that business. Now, if someone came to us, a town or a city or a school district and said, no one will help us, right? No one will give us chargers. We've put it out for bid. No one will help us. Then we would probably go to the state and be the provider of last resort. But we are only a provider of last resort.
Okay, here's an audience question that was sent in from the virtual audience. I think this might be to you, Joel. How soon can the NEVI chargers be installed? Once the challenge over the rules about who can sell electricity are straightened out, how soon after that will the new chargers start being installed?
We are assuming that we are successful with the enabling legislation passing this fall and being signed into law. We believe we've been working on.
Can you just speak into the mic a little bit?
Sure. We've been working on standing up the program. We believe that we'd be able to solicit applications early next year.
So the program will actually start getting off the ground early in 2024.
Yes, we have. This is really the last piece we need. We have the funding. We have the program all but stood up. We're set to go.
Okay, Steve.
Question, Steve Einhorn. First, okay, can you hear me? Good. Okay, you may not want to hear me, but I hear you. This was an excellent panel. I think you guys did a wonderful job. It was very informative. And I believe there are many Americans like myself who believe that there are a lot of advantages for electric cars. But by the same token, electric cars should compete based upon value and price, and not based on government mandates and subsidies. So I have a question, and I'd like to explain to you the reason for my question. The Deficit Reduction Act provided almost $400 billion for electric vehicles. And previous mandates from the government cost another $100 billion. That's $500 billion. Now, for a single family with principal and interest, that's $20,000 for each family. And so my question is it worth it? And I'm going to explain why I'm asking the question. The mining for one electric vehicle has a terrible carbon footprint. Requires about 500,000 pounds of mining. And so to break even, an electric car starts way behind. And currently the electric cars average about 3.5 years. But since an average electric car is only used between 8,000 and 12,000 miles, it's going to take 5 years to break even on your carbon footprint. So to date, in America, we spent $500 billion and we haven't saved 1 ounce of energy. So my question is this worth it?
Thank you, Steve. So is it worth it, given the negatives that Steve talked about?
I'll take a crack. Yeah, I know that there is, acknowledgement that with current battery technology, lithium-ion batteries, that there is environmental impact. I think the consensus of the scientific community is that EV technology is a net positive from a climate perspective. In terms of, I'm not familiar with your calculations or data to, arrive here, but I do think back to when I first got a cell phone a long time ago. It was a pretty rudimentary device, and it was large and heavy, and it didn't have a lot of utility. That technology has grown leaps and bounds. This is a new technology as well. I look at, read articles from, Honda putting, 35-40 billion into battery development, and they're getting close to a solid state sulfur battery that promises to have the battery size and preserve the range. And you look at a much more abundant, source material. I just think there are advantages that we're looking at, that, as technologies mature and become more efficient and less impactful, you need to take those beginning steps to get further down the evolution of that product. Right now EVs are expensive. There's a long wait for them. And I think for the average family, that right now we have early adopters and those with higher income levels they're adopting at a faster rate. As it continues to mature, we're seeing prices come down and become more accessible, and I think will become those primary vehicles that people use as they would an ICE powered engine, and so the numerator denominator problem gets to be much less.
Yeah, I think I'd also add that investment into something doesn't always bear fruit immediately either. I think of Fordlandia, right? Henry Ford going and trying to build this all-inclusive state where he would build every part of a car, that you could do all the way up to the tires. There was a lot of government subsidy in that as well. And I think that's just, one example of how there's been a lot of government investment into gas and diesel vehicles, but that doesn't necessarily, mean that we should not make this type of investment, right? If we don't invest in technology, then we don't learn how to better incorporate that technology into our system, and to make things better either. Same goes with electric vehicles. We started at a place where most of them were gas electric hybrids, which I believe Mike had alluded to earlier, and now we're at a place where that's not the primary way that they're made anymore. They're made strictly as an electric vehicle with an all electric engine, and that's because they can get such better range. So investment into technology, I think is always a positive thing.
All right, a question we received from the audience. For Mike here, actually, how do you encourage or support local municipalities, especially in areas of rural Wisconsin, to adopt EVs for their fleets, given the costs that are involved with them?
Yeah, so we've really, we take a look at the total cost of ownership of the vehicle. So the initial upfront, I mentioned 2 times, that's a lot. Frankly, that's a lot, but so you have to step back and say, okay, how am I using that vehicle? How long am I going to be using that vehicle? A lot of our customers are using refuse is 12 to 14 years is a typical life of a truck. Um, Fire is 20 years, can be 20 years in that investment in the community. Uh, so you look at over the life of that truck, and you look at the total cost of ownership, and what does that look like for you? And what we're finding is that where the technology's at, where the advancements have been made, is that we can actually lower the total cost of ownership by up to 14%. Or anywhere actually between 14 to 15%. When we look at a refuse truck, it's typically about $2.5 million over the life of that truck. And we can lower that by, say, 14% over a fleet that has 10,000 trucks in it. That's a pretty significant payback for that operation and return. And a lot of these are they're public companies, so the return for the investors is pretty significant. But it does take an investment. It's kind of a leap, right? Is paying twice as much for a truck, putting the infrastructure and charging structure in that can run into 6 figures easily to put in a charging infrastructure in a location. But I think you got to look at that return over the life, because you're as long as you own that vehicle, you're paying for that vehicle. It's not just the acquisition costs, but it's also driver costs and ownership costs, and the drivers and driver turnover and recruiting and safety and all of that. All that can be equated to the bottom line, and look at that as you're making decisions on those investments.
All right, before we get to your question, a question that came in from the audience. Who on the panel has a EV, owns an EV? Okay, how about in the audience? Who has an EV? Okay, all right. We need to step it up a little bit, I guess. All right, go ahead.
My name is Brad Spanner. I'm the sustainability director for UW-Oshkosh. I asked a friend of mine who owns an EV what they spent on electricity to charge their vehicle in a year. And it came out to about $100. I also asked a friend who lives in Alaska what they spent on their electricity to run their vehicle for a year, and it was also just over $100. If I spend about $50 every 2 weeks on a tank of gas, I spend about $1,300. My question is, that's a $1,200 savings for an individual. I'm curious how we get some of that savings, because I certainly agree that the motor fuel tax, right, pays for infrastructure, right, or is contributing to the upkeep of our infrastructure. How do we get some of that savings to equally account for the use of electric vehicles using infrastructure, but contribute to maintenance of our roads and highways?
Yes, that's to Joel.
Yep. So, we're getting into, that erosion of the motor fuel tax that we talked about earlier. And this has been a question that's been before transportation departments and policymakers for a long time. CAFE fleet standards have continued to, fuel efficiencies continued to raise throughout the year. Mileage has improved in vehicles over the years, and that's meant less motor fuel tax. And so we do have to get creative. And I think that, this is really an issue that needs a nationwide type approach. We can't have Wisconsin does a road user charge, Illinois does tolling, Michigan does vehicle miles traveled. There are solutions out there, but we do need to have that robust policy debate about, what can adequately fund our infrastructure needs? Is the funding level going to be sufficient? But also, how do we do that fairly? The beauty of the motor fuel tax is, it's a de facto user fee. The more miles you travel, the more you pay. And so, what we've been kind of doing just on an ad hoc basis here in the state is just looking to fill holes. We're looking to get up to that level that we need to, build and maintain the transportation system. But, when you do, I'm happy, for the revenue that we can keep, building and, repairing roads and bridges. But, when just as a long-term solution, I don't know how viable it is to, every 2 years, decide how much is available from the general fund taxes, from the general fund, general purpose revenue, revenue that also goes to pay for education and public safety. There are a lot of very important things that are funded by the general fund. And, transportation is important too. So when you're adding another big piece, another big demand onto that type of revenue as your other, the dedicated revenue source is shrinking. So, I think I think there's a lot of technology that holds promise and as the population continues to become more comfortable with the idea of, having, one of these in your pocket everywhere you go, and it, filling more and more functions and having more utility in your life, and that, some of the concerns that have held back or have been the primary detraction from things like a vehicle miles traveled, where there's a high-tech way to do it that's very precise, and there's a low-tech way that you can do it that's basically reporting your odometer change year over year. I think people are getting more comfortable with the idea that, I can put an air tag in my kid's backpack so that I know where they go and I can find them if need be. People are just becoming more comfortable with that type of technology, which makes it more palatable as a policy solution. So, whether that's, vehicle miles traveled, tolling's a lot easier now with, fast pass systems, and that technology continues to evolve. Ideas of road user charges, there are different iterations of that. So there are the tools to get there. It's just what is, politically viable, will adequately fund transportation, and, what is the public comfortable with? What is the preference for, how do we pay for those improvements?
Okay, let's get another question here.
Thank you. My name is Sue Moraski. I work at Oshkosh Defense. So this one's for Mike. So, no, I wasn't planted. So with the postal vehicle, this kind of goes to some of your comments the whole panel has made. The postal is looking for more BEVs. So we're going to make these vehicles coming off the line in 2024. Are the postal depots ready for it? Do they have the infrastructure to charge 50 to 100 trucks that come back to the postal depot? And then do they have the electrical infrastructure in place for the, what do I want to say, the transformers all beefed up in those areas for that usage they're going to need?
Yeah, so that's been, so the whole, that's a great question. The whole Postal Service contract has been really interesting to watch, right? Because it started out being 10% battery electric vehicles and 90% ICE. And the reason that is because one, the Postal Service did not have the money to put in the infrastructure. And two, they don't have the infrastructure and they don't have the money put in there, right? And so it was interesting to see how the Postmaster General worked with Congress and how all that worked out to where when he got more funding, secured more, and then that started shifting. I think today I was just hearing today that the mix now is like 30% ICE and 70% BEV. I don't think we're producing BEV until maybe 2025, late 2025. So again, that is all timing set in place for the Postal Service to start, you know, executing on their deployment plan and putting that infrastructure in place and being selective as to where they're starting to deploy that. So the first year and a half of that production is going to be ICE engines because of that issue that you brought up.
All right, here's a fire truck question, I think.
I wish. Once again, I'm Greg. I work for Pierce, so the fire truck side. But my question more stems from where I kind of picture myself in the electrical vehicles in 20 years. Like Rivian, Pierce, and Lucid have basically reduced the cost of ownership and gotten rid of pretty much every dealership. And I guess my question kind of stems from like, how does that economic impact of reduction of jobs from, no longer needing mechanics or removal of dealerships? And in my daily life, I don't really go to the grocery store anymore. I furnish my house off Amazon and everything pretty much comes to the door. So I guess where does like Wisconsin see its shift in, you know, bigger commercial delivery vehicles and, ride share programs, and kind of where that will stem from, and maybe less personal use of going to a grocery store to charge my car or something about that.
Yeah, but maybe I'll answer from a macro level, and then let colleagues answer from a more of a Wisconsin level. I think what we're seeing is so between Rivian and Tesla, that's just a different dealer model and how they sell cars, how they service cars. So it's the difference. Ford and GM, spending billions of dollars, putting up battery factories, converting factories over. They'll still have the dealerships. They're still running through a dealership model. So it's kind of just a different model there. I think from a service technician standpoint, we're seeing is that skill set has to change. And while they're not working on a diesel engine or changing filters and fluids on the vehicle, it's a different skill set. And there's got to be training associated with that to build up that knowledge out there for the technicians. And so I think it's going to become more. It is becoming more technology based. It's not just turning wrenches now. It's a lot of, and that's been happening for quite some time on cars. Let's face it. This is kind of the next step evolution into that, where that skill set just has to be it needs to be trained. We will have a lack of that if we don't pay attention and get that training in place across the country. And there's more programs that are starting to be initiated. I was just talking, Michigan Tech is starting from an engineering perspective side, they're starting an EV or BEV classes that's remote. That's sort of like a master's degree type of classes there to start educating at least the engineering. But we need to do that on the technician side too across the country, really.
Yeah, just on that, I know the people at Ford, I've talked to a Ford dealer and others at Ford, they want to make every Ford dealership a EV center, where you would charge your vehicle at the Ford station, right? You answer all your questions, you'd service your battery or swap out your battery. So I think that they're all trying to adapt, but will there be fewer dealerships, physical dealerships? I think for certain. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for holding this. This is pretty interesting. Dan Krueger, I think We Energies does a heck of a job. Most reliable utility in the Midwest. Thank you. No, I used to work for them and I was an EFT customer. So anyway, that's it. So I'm going to be quoting some numbers from a publication called Panorama. This is produced on a monthly basis by Porsche. They're very much into doing EVs. A couple of things I'm concerned about. One is it's expected that by the year 2030, that the EV battery market is going to be about $55 billion. The difficulty is with the current growth in sourcing and manufacturing, we'd only be able to meet about 30% of that. The EU has recognized that and it has moved their goals from having an entire EV transportation fleet by 2030 back to 2050. I don't think the US has gotten that message yet. And I do have firsthand experience in some of this. My brother owns a mining company. He and his partner have the second largest claim, the claim on the second largest deposit of lithium in Nevada. The problem is the Department of the Interior will not grant a permit to mine the lithium. The lead time for a lithium mine is 2 years. I want to know what's the Wisconsin Department of Transportation doing to try to influence the federal government to expedite those permits.
Bet you didn't see that one coming, Joe.
No, I didn't. But I think the question does get to, a real issue, whether it is, availability of source materials and, or, supply chain disruptions. There has been kind of different factors that throttle the availability of EVs. And you can see that in the wait time that the consumers have for, with strong demand and limited supply. I think again, we keep coming back to this, but the batteries that we have today are not going to be the batteries that we use, 3 or 4 years from now. And I don't know what that does to your brother in his claim, but I really do think that as we start to move into solid state batteries or new battery technology, that these are all kind of the fits and starts that you have with a young and emergent technology. I think that denotes why government investment in this sector is needed, because there is that uncertainty, and it's been uncertainty that for a long time the private sector was meeting kind of those early adopter, those niche, those consumers that put a very high premium on environmental concerns or fuel efficiency concerns. They were meeting that demand, but we're now seeing that demand widen to become much more, a much greater percentage of car purchasers. So one thing the private sector is really good at doing is meeting public demand and finding ways, whether it's technological development or working with policymakers at Congress to be able to make current regulations match and be kind of right-sized for either the current or future demand. Is that's really what government does. So I know there are choke points and there are limited, there are certain things that reduce the availability of anywhere along the supply chain, but I'm confident that those are overcomable in the short term.
Anybody else want to weigh in on the lithium mine issue? Okay. You can write your Congress member. All right, here you go.
I thank you for the panel today. We've talked a lot about some of the challenges and opportunities for consumerism in the EV market. I'm wondering what the panel's take is on the opportunity Wisconsin could take advantage of. Job opportunities, new educational opportunities, ways to look at the particular manufacturing expertise that we might have in the state. What are the ways that we in Wisconsin can capture some of this market opportunity?
So
why don't we go to, oh, I'm sorry. I was
Oh,
going
no.
to say, why, Mike, I mean, your company's doing it.
Yeah. So, so like I said, we've been working on electrification for 30 years. We partnered with DOE 20 years ago. We actually used some of the federal funding, grant money we were awarded to partner with them and develop out. We actually developed a hybrid refuse truck 20 years ago with some cutting edge technology at the time. So we continue to invest in that and grow. And then as customer demand is there, we both kind of create customer demand and answer customer demand with that product. That is, and the investments that we put into our product development. We'll spend over the next 4 years, we'll spend $300 million on electrification alone, and probably another 200 million in autonomy, and so forth. Those result in new products, and those result in jobs and that contribute into the economy. And that's really, and it contributes to our company growth. And that's really what we want to do. We want to grow our company, because when we grow our company, it's better in all the communities that we're in. It's better for the communities, and it provides job security, it provides jobs, it provides just a lot of advantages into the community. So that's the best thing that we can do, is keep on investing into our company in those areas.
I think Wisconsin is well situated to take advantage of a number of the things that you're talking about. In Wisconsin, we have a rich manufacturing history. We know how to make things. We have a lot of legacy companies, whether it's in automotive or other types of manufacturing, that have the know-how to do this. When your President Biden was in Milwaukee just a couple weeks ago, and he went to visit a company that is looking at different types of renewable power generation, but the newest sector that they're pivoting to is building the charging cabinets for EVs, and seeing the great potential there. All of the dollars that come through the NEVI program are subject to Buy America requirements, where you need to have the vast majority of your materials and the parts that go into the product be made domestically. That's presented some challenges for us, but I think it's really a laudable policy goal, and one that, much like we keep referencing these kind of fits and starts, the growing pains of new technology, but there really looks to be a market there, a long-term sustainable market. So I think if you're going to keep making things, you have to keep making things that people need, in their current lives. And I think this is a sector that we're well positioned to capitalize on.
I'll tell you just quickly, the question that Steve asked earlier about the investment, the millions or billions of dollars that are being put in there, that is debatable whether that's the right thing to. I'll tell you, the outcome of that is advancing technology, and advancing technology quicker and faster. The companies that capitalize on that, they're the ones that are growing and putting jobs into communities, and the communities are benefiting from that. So there is some trickle down to that effect. Yeah. And I don't want, I'm not debating that's the right amount, or it's too much or too little. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
We'll leave it there, and we'll move to the next question, if that's all right.
Barbara Koldos, I'm with New North, and I have a quick question. Thank you so much for speaking about EV. This is a very interesting topic. Another topic that we've been hearing about lately is AI. And I'm just curious if AI has any sort of role in the EV market. I know you've alluded to autonomous vehicles, kind of the air tags for children, things like that. What role does AI have? And I'm just curious, if there is one, where you see the future going. And that might be just a fun question for you.
The joke in people who work in there's a difference between electric vehicles, which are different from connected vehicles, which are different from autonomous vehicles. And the kind of the running joke amongst people who are working in the autonomous vehicle section is that the technology holds great promise. It's just 5 years around 5 years into the future, and then 5 years later is another 5 years, and so on and so forth. There are a number of pilots throughout the country right now. We've got one in Racine that we're working with UW Parkside to really road test autonomous vehicle technology. And it is there are different levels of autonomous vehicles ranging from, ones that you have, a car like mine, or, that doesn't have, really the host of features in it, up to those that have maybe a driver assist or a lane keep or an automatic, emergency braking feature that are becoming in certain segments of vehicles. Just, they're endemic now in those types of vehicles. People tend to think about the fully autonomous vehicle that's self-driving, and Tesla's been doing a lot of work. There are a number of companies that are doing kind of on public streets or closed course testing of this. It's not mature yet. The space that we're working in right now as the department is helping to frame out the kind of the policy, the public policy and regulation that you need to make sure that these vehicles are safe, to see how they interact with other vehicles, with non-autonomous vehicles. How do they interact with trucks? How do they interact with emergency situations? These are things that we need to make sure that who's liable. Like if I'm out at the bar and I'm have too many drinks and I get into my fully autonomous vehicle and it's involved in a crash. Well, by law, am I the driver? And so we've got liability questions, involved. If there's, a more standard type crash, like, is it the driver who's responsible because they didn't hit the brake soon enough? Or is it the software company because they program the different standards that it uses? So there's lots of considerations that, in essence, what we're trying to get to is what are the standards that need to be met, on a state level or on a national level before the technology is much more prevalent and has potential for real impact on road users.
All right, we have one question that was submitted as well regarding WEC's pilot program, Dan. So we'll turn to you on this one. I know that those pilot programs launched in March of 2022 and are designed to remove barriers associated with this electric vehicle technology. Are you able to expand on it a bit, and who is able to take part in this pilot program?
Sure. Pilot was launched March of 2022. It's a 5-year pilot, $50 million in funding. It's open to residential and commercial and business. So the uptake with residentials has been slower, I think, because people buy their car at the Tesla or whatever, and they get the charger that they choose, and they don't need ours. For the commercials, we've got hotels. There's some towns. There's bus fleets. I heard the question about the Postal Service. It's going to look just like some of the delivery centers, right? So you can see some of the, I won't name the companies, but really big international delivery companies with depots. There's just rows of chargers, and they plug their vans in at night. So really any business or residential customer of We Energies is eligible.
All right, as we wrap up our evening tonight, I would love to have some final thoughts on what we've discussed in conversation tonight. We'll just go down the line if you'd like as we wrap up our evening. Final thoughts here today, Mike?
No, I think, it's kind of a hot button topic, EVs, but I think as we look into the future, it's really, I'm excited, as I said before, about EVs, because what it can bring more than just a battery vehicle. I think, there's a lot more benefits than, the environment it's a big deal, but I think there's a lot more benefits beyond that. And we touched on AI a little bit here. It's all a platform to advance, and we'll be sitting here. We could sit here 3 years from now, we'd have a different conversation, probably around solid state batteries and mining in the US, and how that, has our dependency on foreign governments and foreign countries for some of these raw materials. I think 3 years from now, we'd have a much different conversation. So it's accelerating fast.
I think we've had a really nice and wide-ranging discussion. I really appreciate the variety of questions. This is one of the most exciting areas that we have in transportation right now. I think it's as Mike has said, that it has the potential to yield great benefit on the environmental impact on a lower cost, lower maintenance vehicle and fuel source, have a platform that's more readily adaptable in design for some of these emerging technologies. So I'm glad you're all interested in it and keen attention. It's going to be an area to watch and continue to have involvement in.
Yeah, it's a fascinating time in the transportation world, between this and, as far as parking transportation is concerned, the adaptation of technology into transportation, which previously did not have very much, a bus driver just kind of drove a bus. There wasn't much else for them to do, and integrating things like AI, electric vehicle infrastructure, all those sorts of things. It's going to be a really fascinating ride for the next 5-10 years at the very least.
Yeah, I agree. It's going to be interesting. Don't know how long it's going to take. I mean, a lot of things will change in 5 years. It could probably be decades before we see a huge transition. I think choice is good. So if people want EVs, they should get EVs. We'll see where it goes with internal combustion engines, or ICE, as you were calling them. But I think the future is very interesting. Somebody mentioned a bag phone, I think, on the panel. I had a bag phone. I never could have imagined this right in front of me. So I'm really fascinated to see where technology takes us.
Thank you to our panel. And an extended thank you to the Tommy Thompson Center on Public Leadership, to WisPolitics, UW-Oshkosh, and all of you, of course, for being here tonight. Thank you so much.